On behalf of the World Customs Organization, East and Southern Africa Regional Private Sector Group, we are delighted to host you on this Thursday morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you reside. As the year is drawing to a close, we are once again pleased to host another webinar titled Connecting the ESA Region Through Technology and Trade Digitalization. This is in fact our 11th webinar. We have some excellent speakers lined up for you today from our region and indeed globally. These include Martin Cameron from Trade Advisory, Jason Blackman from DHL Sub-Saharan Africa, Anthony O'Sullivan from the World Logistics Passport, and Juanita Clark from the Digital Council Africa. I am sure they will thoroughly enlighten you today, as they are all experts of the highest pedigree in their respective fields. Just some house rules for your information. Would you please mute your microphone and switch off your video during the webinar? For the panelists, they will be on video while presenting. Please make use of the chat function to ask any questions you might have. Now, if we do have time, we will go through some of the questions. If we don't, we will be committed to get your answers, your questions answered in writing to you after the event. Furthermore, as with all the previous webinars, all the presentations will be shared on the website. And if you have any further questions about the Regional Private Sector Group, please feel free to contact the team at those email addresses you see below. As we welcome more guests to the webinar, it is worth pointing out that the webinar will be recorded and made available on our website in due course. So be sure to have a look, as well as the other resources available. And on that note, allow me to quickly showcase some of the content you will find on our website. Firstly, you will find all the information about the Regional Private Sector Group, its functioning, its values, its mission and vision, as well as, importantly, the terms of reference. As will be the case of this event, you will also find all previous webinars. We also add them to our YouTube channel, so feel free to have a look and please share this with your colleagues in your respective countries to increase our reach. Also, there is extensive information on all of our projects, including those on smart borders, the AO programs, research in the region, etc. Also on the website is periodic newsletters and information resources, which we share with our members. So please feel free to subscribe to these. There's about a minute or 2 minutes to go before we start. So the next voice you will hear will be that of Dr. Juanita Maria, who will chair this webinar for us. Thank you for joining us. We hope you will find this webinar very insightful and enlightening. Thank you.
Hello, colleagues. Thank you for joining us. It's now on the dot 2 o'clock in South African time, and where you're joining us, it might be a different time zone. So welcome to all of you this afternoon. I think we can have a good session for the next 90 minutes, and we have a lineup of good speakers. So maybe when we talk, or when we understand and you talk to me about big data, I probably understand we're going from a byte data to a kilobyte to a megabyte to a zettabyte to a zottabyte to a zenutite byte. But I think for us, it's more important, what do we do in supply chain and how can we unlock the value in the supply chain with digitalization, and specifically, I think artificial intelligence, because we can see now the supply chain is not a traditional one-liner, but it's very complex and it needs to talk to different role players in the supply chain. So when you look at our program, you will see that we can have Martin, which touch on the big data and specifically South Africa. And I think you might ask, well, Juanita, why do we just focus on South Africa? Because in our region, we have 24 countries. But as we grow in the maturity and with the webinars, we will include other countries as well. Then we come to Paperless, which is Jason that's going to take us through. And that's very much on the supply chain. Then afterwards, I think that's a very good development that's taking place now, and we can see the traction that it's taken in the World Logistics Passport. And there Anthony is going to take us through on what they experience in Dubai. And then at the end, we will stop with Juanita Clark that's going to explain a little bit on the digital trade. And then I just saw my colleague from Kenya, which is Larry, and I see his video cameras on. He will then conclude with us with a couple of questions. So welcome, Larry. We don't have a lot of people on the call, but I think we all know that people watch afterwards, they come in and view it on YouTube. So for us, we don't want to look at the numbers, but we look at the quality of content that we portray. So Harry, I'm not sure, Larry, I'm not sure if you just want to say welcome, and then we go straight to Martin. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Juanita, and thank you to yourself and Jacob Manlin and the team for putting this up. We are looking forward to a fruitful meeting. And as you said, we will be on YouTube, and this will be there for the long haul. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you very much. Martin, so it's over to you, and we're delighted to hear your views on the South African side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juanita. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to check, can you see the slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right, excellent. There we go. Well, we start with, you know, the digital side of things and digitalization, and then I'll talk a little bit about the opportunities specifically from a South African perspective. As Juanita said, you know, obviously one can look at the question from many different angles, from all the different countries' perspectives. We've just used today's example, South Africa, to demonstrate some of the concepts that we're talking about. So I'm going to briefly look at what do we mean by digital trade, then looking at the context for Africa, then looking at how do we identify opportunities, a big data approach, a bit of the work that we do in association with the Northwest University in South Africa, and then some conclusions. So what is digital trade? I always say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And this is very relevant in the context of concepts such as digital trade, such as what Juanita mentioned earlier, big data. Some people think, you know, in terms of size of things, but if you're not computer literate and you don't have a computer, 1,000 lines written out by hand on a piece of paper is also big data. So even in that concept, the beauty in the eye of the beholder is still true. It all is relative. So if we look at digitalization first, before we talk about digital trade, what do we mean by that? And, you know, it's important when people talk about different concepts that they first talk about what is it exactly that they have in mind when they use a term or terminology, because otherwise you have people talking past each other because they think they are talking about the same thing simply because they use the same words. So in this context, we're talking about transforming of economic activities through the application of digital technologies that are related to the so-called fourth industrial revolution. Because we had digital technologies, you know, many, many years ago in the 50s and the 60s as well as today, but it was applied in different contexts. So this concept also incorporates cross-border commercial implications in the digital world, in the world of changing things to bits and bytes. So then if we look at digital trade within the broader context of digitalization, what do we mean by digital trade? So it's a very broad concept. Those digital technologies that has an implication within the broader global economic context is those that we include in the definition for digital trade in the context of what we are talking about. And these are not only pieces of software, these are not only things like smartphones and cell phones, but things like 3D printing or additive manufacturing, the whole concept of the value chain of everything that's involved in e-commerce. So production, distribution, production meaning physical production of goods still, but the order placing, etc., takes place via electronic means. The inclusion of labor-saving technological developments, things like robots or robotization. It's also an Asian concept that starts, surfacing in the language that these words didn't exist in the past. AI, Juanita mentioned, artificial intelligence, automation of drones, all of these kind of technologies. And in the future, self-driving cars, etc. For now, I've excluded it simply because it's not a short-term practical tool and product that we're going to see in our markets soon. And then the broader concept, for instance, of big data, where we look at computation and analysis of very large data sets. As I said earlier, the large is relative to who's looking at the problem, what kind of problem, and for one person, what is large is for the next person not a problem. And then seeing what patterns and trends and associations can we actually observe out of the data. So this kind of sets the scenes for the concepts that we are talking about. Now, if we look at the digital economy in Africa and recent developments based on work that's been done by the Economic Council for Africa, or the Economic Commission for Africa under the UN, in cooperation with the Friedrich Ebert Stichting, there are very good research papers done on the topic of many of the different dimensions of digital trade and the digital economy in Africa. And I've highlighted a couple of points, which I think, I don't want to be negative, but I'm trying to show you the realistic side of the hype. So if we talk about, in relative terms, growth of the digital economy in Africa, it's been limited. And this is not what I'm saying, this is what the research shows. So in 2016, only 22% of the population actually had access to the internet compared to the world average of about 45%, 46%. So only 1/3 of a person, so not even a full person in every 100 people in Africa have access to broadband subscriptions. Because keep in mind, while a person may have a text mobile phone, when we start talking about the serious application of digitization, digital trade, and commercial large-scale transactions, then bandwidth and infrastructure becomes an important aspect of the discussion. Jason will talk about more about the smaller type of high volume, but in actual size, small parcel trade. That is a feature of Africa and that we are seeing developing. But on this topic, if we talk about it from an industrialization point of view, if we're talking about it from a size, economies of scale, and significant economic sectoral development perspective, then that's still small. Only 6 African countries are among the top 100 countries in the world in terms of ICT development positioning in the rankings. And for instance, ICT goods such as computers, advanced digital products, etc., only constituted about 5% of merchandise imports in Africa in 2015, while in global terms, that was 13% at that stage. Now, obviously, these trends have increased. The relative sizes have grown over time, especially in the last couple of months with COVID, but we're kind of looking at this more from a structural relative picture. So compared to other parts of the world, Africa is still very much in the infancy of digital trade development, etc., and digitization in that context. If you look at the last point there, the UNCTAD Business to Consumer Index for 2018, which is relatively recent, shows that the average index for Africa was about 30 compared to the world average of 55. So generally speaking, compared to other parts of the world, if you think of Europe, America, Southeast Asia, etc., Latin America, we're not so well advanced when it comes to digital trade. That doesn't mean that there's not opportunity. That doesn't mean that the trends are not showing that it is increasing and growing. So we look at some of that. Now, as an example, we've seen the rise of the so-called digital platforms in Africa, again, off a low base, relatively small, but there are good signals being sent. But as you can see also from the map on the right-hand side, it's concentrated in particular countries. It's not widespread yet. And part of the challenge, in terms of growing the general acceptance and usage of these types of technologies and the trade associated with that, comes back to physical infrastructure. So I've used this depiction before in other discussions with SAF, is that if you look at digital trade, increased connectivity, etc., the real world matters. It's not only about having a digital phone, because you can have the smartest, most expensive phone that can do wonders and also put your kids to bed, which they technically do nowadays. But if you order something and that good cannot get to you due to lack of proper connectivity from a road, rail, maritime infrastructure perspective, then the digital tool that you have and the fact that you can commercially transact on a platform is still not going to help economic growth and development take place. So this is a very big and busy picture. The important part here to focus on is the fact that if we change things like tariffs, we have a significant effort, but very little gain. If we change infrastructure, it takes long, but we have much more gain. And on top of that, logistics, the world that we are talking about here, in terms of freight forwarding, in terms of moving of goods, etc., much more economic effect is achieved by having efficient logistics, by having standardized logistics, etc. And then obviously access to finance and credit, etc. But the bottom line is the big picture here is the fact that you need all of these things to work together. So if we want digital trade to help increase intra-Africa trade, the physical infrastructure, things like fiber, things like sustainable and quality service of services is key. If we don't have electricity that supports the networks, as we're currently seeing, for instance, in South Africa, the fact that I'm sitting here at the moment in a situation where I've got load shedding. If I didn't plan for that, I wouldn't have been able to talk to you right now. And we are just lucky that in between me and you somewhere else in the world, the technical infrastructure actually is keeping on running while we have load shedding. Now, more and more, what we are seeing is our networks cannot handle a lack of energy, etc. And more the service and the connectivity levels degrades as we go along. And the same goes for in the rest of Africa. If we don't have proper energy and connectivity that drives the digital connectivity, as well as the physical location, logistics and infrastructure, then all this pent-up potential that everybody's talking about, all the hype that everybody's talking about, is not going to realize. And it will stay a little candle in the darkness as opposed to becoming a big fire lighting up the sky. So to demonstrate in terms of the kind of modeling we do and how we look at trade and opportunities, here's an example of taking a container from Rwanda, Kigali, right in the middle of the continent, to Luanda in Angola, which is our southwesternmost upper country in the group, in the geography of what Juanita was mentioning. And in reality, people that do know Africa, and I'm sure you guys that are listening in, you're involved in this game, you know that you can't simply take a container of goods from Rwanda to Luanda like I've drawn on the map. The reality of the matter is you'll probably have to follow these types of routes, either put it on a truck all the way down to South Africa out of Durban or Cape Town, or on a truck down to Dar es Salaam, or maybe even up through Uganda, around down to Mombasa, then on a ship, and then it gets to Luanda. And that makes a massive difference in the ability of countries to trade within regional geography, And also, when you are landlocked, as in the case of a country like Rwanda or Burundi, Zambia, etc., you are also dependent on what your neighbors do and how they invest in infrastructure and how they manage their systems, etc. I'm sure I don't need to tell you guys that. And on the right-hand side, we're just demonstrating the fact that if you want to move again from the middle of Africa to somewhere in the world, you've got so many transit points and modal switches, etc., associated with the movement of the goods. That example takes a container from Kigali, Rwanda, all the way to Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. And the reality of the matter is these things all add costs, delays, potential for breakdowns, damage, etc. So, and all of that translates into increased costs. Okay. So digital trade, absolutely. Digital commercial interaction, absolutely. But the stuff still needs to move on the surface of the earth or the ocean or the air. And if that infrastructure that supports those physical movement of goods does not work properly and is not competitive, is not standardized, is not efficient, all the digital trade in the world is not going to make a difference, because the fact that you can press a button and quickly get a transaction done doesn't mean that the goods will arrive at your doorstep, except if you use DHL and Jason's team. They'll make sure it gets to you. But the reality is, unfortunately, in Africa, we do have a deficit of infrastructure, and especially on the last mile and major connectivity between countries. So if we look at the context of Africa from South Africa's perspective, just some recent trends, and I specifically focused based on our last discussions around air transport as an example, also in the context of East Africa, which is quite interesting. We see that although in relative terms, this picture down in the middle that gives you that black dotted line shows how in relative terms rail has increased, but look on the left-hand side at that bar chart, you'll see that rail is insignificant in compared to road transport within the localized context of trade from South Africa into East and Southern Africa. And on the right-hand side, just to show how, for instance, which was interesting for me to see how East Africa has very much, relatively speaking, compared to 6 years ago, grown significantly in terms of air transport of exports of goods going into East Africa from South Africa. Now, if we get to an exporter, the key question that they are struggling with is they want to export a product, and where should I focus the efforts to take all their expertise, resources, etc., and focus on developing markets? That's the key question that we find when we talk to companies that they struggle with, and they are in good company, because globally, the World Economic Forum, the ITC, the World Trade Organization, and the OECD have been doing surveys over the last 10, 15 years continuously. And one of the factors that they ask companies, specifically currently exporting companies, so companies that do know how to export, which of the factors that are covered in the questionnaire would they rate the most valuable for them in terms of if they can see an improvement in these factors like access to trade finance, network infrastructure, transport systems, etc., tariffs, fees, charges, and so forth. And you'll see there on the picture that the top, in terms of both large and small companies, aspect of particular dimension of the various questions that's being asked is they would value access to information about export opportunities the most, because you can figure out how to do something in terms of a transit route, in terms of building your product. But the big challenge that we have in today's world is there's too much information. There's a mismatch between those that have the product, those that need the product, and getting them together is where the challenge lies. And that's where things like big data comes in. So we've developed over the last 25 years a methodology to help identify what we call realistic export opportunities, considering both supply and demand factors, but then more importantly, the 4 geographies, what I call in terms of things like logistics and the time value of money and trade facilitation. So you've got transport geography, your economic geography, socioeconomic geography, and commercial geography. All of these factors actually impacts on where and how you can look at which markets are realistic or not. And then I thought I'll keep it a little bit light. Then we put it into our computer and we polish our crystal ball and we come up with a set of answers. But this is tongue in the cheek. We actually apply quite a lot of science. We've had 9 PhDs and 14 master students working on this methodology just in South Africa. And before that, it was originating in Belgium at the University of Antwerp. So there's been a lot of thought put into this process. And as a result, to give you some context from South Africa, particularly if we look at the region, this gives you an idea of not what the opportunities are, but just in relative terms, what in a structural way. So we look at it over a kind of a structural 5-year period, which are the large importing markets. Doesn't matter from where they import. And in that context, from South Africa's perspective, we see that there are, if we look at international trade statistics, for more than 5,000 products at the HS6 digit level for these countries, more than 96,000 combinations of products and markets in terms of Angola importing various products and Tanzania importing various products. So there's an expressed import demand, because an exporter is always interested in where the import demand is, not only total demand, because total demand, part of it could be supplied by domestic production. So we are interested in the residual, the part that actually needs to be supplied by the imports of goods as opposed to domestic production. That's a lot. Now, if we apply our methodology and we go through this process, we end up with, out of this group of 97,000, if we really are strict in the way that we apply all the research, we find that there's about 2,800 odd combinations in this group of markets and products. From South Africa's perspective, about 665 products that South Africa already knows how to produce and market for the purposes of exports. And within the region, there is still potential. So we actually ignore that which part South Africa already supplies to these markets. We look at of these products that South Africa can make, that South Africa knows how to export. If we were to be able to take away some market share from the current supplies of those products into the target markets, that would amount to about $450 million, which would translate to about 2 billion in rand terms. So that's a significant number. And those are markets that we are familiar with. Those are markets that we've been trading with and that we have a good relationship with. So similarly, one can turn this equation on its head and to say, if I look at it from Rwanda's perspective, or if I look at it from Angola's perspective into the region, what does it look like? Where are the opportunities? Where are the most realistic opportunities? So I can't go into the detail of particular products, etc., or particular markets, given the limited time we have today, but just thought that in the context of this discussion, as a lead into this discussion, I wanted to define for you, but kind of broadly what we talk about when we talk about digitalization and digital trade. And yes, the concept does offer opportunities for trade and industrial so-called leapfrogging. Some people are skeptical about the term leapfrogging, but we've seen in communication terms how the so-called leapfrogging with cell phones and mobile networks in Africa has been successful and continues to grow and be successful. So we believe the word leapfrogging is relevant, but physical infrastructure and efficiency of logistics processes and chains are the Achilles heel. If we don't make sure that those work well, the potential that's locked up in what Africa can offer, and especially Southern and East Africa, it will not realize to the scale and the hype that people are talking about if we do not sort out and make sure that the physical trade facilitation, last mile access to customers, etc., actually is on par with the rest of the world. So with that, I hope it's a realistic context as opposed to a pessimistic context. And we have demonstrated, without going into the detail of particular products, that there's a lot of latent potential from South Africa's perspective, and make no mistake, from any of the other countries into the region's perspective, there's a lot of latent potential. The devil is in the detail in terms of looking at the particular opportunities, getting the entrepreneurs, getting the policymakers, getting the logistics and service providers together to realize those opportunities. But if we do it in the right way, and if we shall we say, focus on the right building blocks in the process, there's no reason why we can't grow Africa, you know, to at least aim at all the hype that we are hearing and seeing. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. You definitely captured my imagination. I was wondering when I look at your slides, what is now the flame or the candle was a flame? Is it now there's 96,000 combinations that we go down to 2,900, let's say, lines to be active? But I think the colleagues on the line will agree with me. Very nicely put together, and we appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Then Jason, you're on the line. We can listen to your excitement. No paper or paperless trade. So take us through your slides. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Juanita, and thanks for the opportunity to present on what we at DHL at least deem to be a very important part of the trade facilitation agenda in Africa in terms of promoting the objectives of both the TFA and, more importantly, the operational implementation of the AFCTFA. And hopefully today a little bit of that information will come through to show you some of the challenges that lie ahead, but some of the opportunities that we have within Africa. So as always, I always like to start with what we see as the trade facilitation focus in Africa, which is, and this is based on feedback from both industry and customers and traders, is they want to see transparency. They want to see simplification, harmonization, and standardization. And in all of this, you see digitization as a key enabler for these processes, from communication of information to simplification of trade processes and harmonization. So there's a huge opportunity for digitization and paperless trade to further support the objectives of trade facilitation in Africa and push the needle forward in terms of delivering the results that we want to see in terms of expanding intra-Africa trade, reducing the cost of cross-border trade and clearance processes. And there's a lot of work going on, a lot of focus, particularly Juanita will tell you in South Africa, on driving the digital agenda and paperless trade. So those are the four trade facilitation focuses. All would be supported, as I said, by digitization and paperless trade. Now, so we get to see why my screen is not moving. So in terms of the current landscape, just to outline the context in which this presentation is being conducted, is that, and this is based
Jason,
on
I'm just going to stop you there. We don't see your slides. I'm not sure if you're sharing it with us.
Hold on. You know what I think I've done? It looked like I was sharing it, but Martin had still got his presentation on. So if you just give me 1 second, I think that's the issue. Give me 1 minute. I will go back.
Thank you.
Okay, here we go. Tell me if you can now see it.
Yes, it's coming through. Yes, perfect. We can see.
Okay,
thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, man. Thank you for that. All right. So just to let me just quickly see if I can scroll. Yeah. So that was the discussion on the transparency, simplification, harmonization, and standardization slide that I just covered off, and was assuming you could see the screen because it had a little bit more information on the right-hand side about the government being an enabler of growth, simpler, faster, cheaper, and more predictable trade that digitization certainly supports. And certainly, and talking from a perspective of DHL, and by no means please take this as a marketing tactic for DHL, but within DHL, we rely heavily on digitization across Africa to enable fast and efficient customs clearance. So as a simplified example, the use of digitized images for advanced preparation of customs declarations through imaging systems that we use in all 51 sub-Saharan African countries as an example. So digitization and paperless trade certainly has a part to play in, as I said, with the TFA, but more importantly, the AFCTFA. So in terms of the current landscape, and this is based on feedback from the authorities, from interactions with my customs team in each one of the countries that DHL operates, or in every country in Africa. So the advantage I have is I base a lot of my feedback on the actual realities on the ground versus theoretical documentation and what we hear in terms of printed objectives. So, I do a lot of interviews with my teams to find out what the status quo is and where we're at. And so we're still finding across Africa, there's still a reliance on hard copy documentation and manual or paper-based procedures. In one country alone, in one of the more developed economies, we have to print a copy of 4 copies of every file, and it gets passed down through about 4 or 5 customs officer in a country that has a very well-developed custom systems, separate to Asacuda, that has a risk profiling option within it. Yet we're still having to print out files, still having to pass paperwork down the rank and file in terms of customs officers. And so we still see this hard copy documentation alliance. It is shifting, but it's only shifted in terms of paperless trade about 2% in 2 years. In 2019, the UN conducted a survey on paperless trade in Africa, and you can see that in 2019, there was a 47% implementation rate of paperless trade under cover of the Trade Facilitation Agreement. That's only improved to 49.19% in the 2021 survey. You compare that with the rest of the world. In 2019, the rest of the world was sitting at 62.7%. In 2021, the paperless trade globally stands at about 65%. So yes, granted, there's also only been about a 2% improvement globally, but Africa still lags about, what are we looking at, 15 to 16% behind the rest of the world. And so those are the current statistics that are currently published by the United Nations in terms of their paperless trade surveys. So it's based on actual survey data. And of course, we all know the benefits and the cost savings and efficiencies that are made by employing paperless trade. There are well-documented cases in play that we can show you that demonstrate how, especially during COVID, digitization is becoming more and more important, especially in the reduced number of resources that are available in the regulatory offices in various countries. And during lockdown, digitization became a reality for a number of countries, and the benefits that digitization offered in terms of paperless trade became more and more evident, especially in demonstrating the trade-off risk between revenue loss and risk management. And it becomes a very, very practical reality, especially with the potential continuation of COVID into 2022. In some cases, the expectation is that some countries in Africa won't normalize their trade environments until probably towards the end of next year. So this whole paperless trade agenda becomes more and more important, not only from a COVID perspective, but pre-COVID as well. There were moves underway to push and drive this agenda. Case in point, I've got a country, I won't mention it. I don't believe it's prudent to mention countries by name, but it's just an example to demonstrate some of the challenges of getting paperless trade initiated. I happened to be in the country. I was interviewing some of the customs authorities. And in the one country where there was a published paperless trade objective promoted by government, asking the customs officers clearing the shipments, why were 4 sets of paperwork needed? Response was, and not the first time I've heard this comment, we've always done it this way. And often change management needs to be coupled with a paperless trade agenda. And one of the things I'm busy working on at the moment is looking at how do we do a change management training program for the public sector in initiating change like paperless trade, moving away from the old habits of using physical paperwork and being more comfortable actually seeing the paperwork to moving to a paperless type of agenda. And so that change needs to be done at the coalface, so to speak, through change agenda or through change management training and being able to embrace the change that paperless trade will bring. In some of the countries, for example, what DHL has done in 2 countries at least is we're now providing the customs authority with tablets. So during the working day, they check the tablets out of our inventory and they use it whilst they're in the bond store to use the tablets to access the imaged paperwork and to actually do online inspection report updating. So usually what they'll do is they'll do their inspections, they'll go back to their office, and then they would have to find the time to log in and update the system. By having the tablets with them and being able to have those tablets on a Wi-Fi network in a bond store whilst doing an inspection, excuse me, my apologies. My apologies for that. Whilst doing the inspection, they can now update the inspection system using the tablets. So there's alternative ways to pushing the agenda, but this is one of the challenges we've got is change management and embracing the change that the paperless trade will bring. In this particular country, as a note, DHL alone was moving around 500 kilograms of documents for archiving. Because when I was there and I said to them, but there's a paperless trade agenda, and I said, why are there 5 bags of documents waiting for archiving? And they said, that's this week's file that customs have released. And in a paperless environment, that's 500 kilograms of paperwork that we could have avoided having to be printed out because we have electronic archiving solutions. So change management with modernization we find is often lacking. And one of the focus areas that we're looking at particularly is to how do we assist and support the public-private sector dialogue through initiatives on change management, for example. Of the 51 SSA countries that I surveyed with my team, only 8 of these countries are using risk-based profiling, for example. The customers want to physically see the shipment, they want to physically see the paperwork, and we tend to see a poor risk-based approach to customs controls. And there is certainly opportunity for a change in approach to looking at pre-arrival processing and looking at the paperwork that's available through digitized and paperless means before the shipment arrives, and start doing selective inspections versus a one-size-fits-all approach. Of the 51 countries I surveyed, as well as within Sub-Saharan Africa, 41 of these had 100% inspection regimes, even with paperless trade available through image digitization. We were seeing that they were still waiting for the shipments to arrive and still physically inspecting them. And so there seems to be still a focus on revenue without the balance of trade facilitation and the ease of doing business. We've got 37 countries in Africa using asset clearance systems. 14 other countries are using varying self-developed or manual systems. Yep, there are indeed still countries that still rely on manual clearance systems, or that's limited. And if asset is down, for example, there's very limited or backup customs systems, meaning that customs clearance has virtually come to a grinding halt or a grinding halt. Now, another example of where paperless trade can play a very critical role is in AEO or preferred trader programs. At the moment, there are limited opportunities for the benefits that AEO offer. And I'm of the firm opinion that with paperless trade and with the opportunity to pre-inspect the documents against a trader's AEO status, including the transporter, you will have an opportunity to expedite the release of goods for those traders that have demonstrated compliance in the past through their AEO status. What we're also seeing, and another reason for fast-tracking the paperless trade agenda, and particularly over the last year, is we're seeing a significant growth in the B2C volumes that are posing challenges for the customs authorities who are grappling with how to manage this increased volume. In some countries, we've seen growth rates of 60 to 70% on e-commerce shipments, particularly driven through COVID, through lockdowns when logistics companies were allowed to operate. And so in South Africa, by example, last year when was it, May, June, when they allowed non-essential e-commerce goods to be delivered, the e-commerce industry accelerated rapidly. And that can be managed and properly controlled through the use of digital media, digitization, and paperless trade, as we've seen in South Africa, where we have paperless interaction with customs and with the ability to upload documents through e-filing portals, for example. So certainly there's evidence from what we're seeing so far as to the significant benefits that paperless trade will provide, especially in the fact that we're lagging behind the rest of the world in terms of paperless based trading. This is a map that was done in 2019, and it's an interesting graphical representation of where Africa fits into the picture in terms of the UN Global Survey on digital and sustainable trade facilitation. They've done a similar survey. I'll show you those now, those results. Back in 2019, you can see on this map the percentage of achievement of Sub-Saharan Africa against various elements of the trade facilitation agreement, such as automated customs systems, electronic single windows, electronic submissions of customs declarations. It showed a picture where the Sub-Saharan African region lagged behind the rest of the world. And as I say, since this survey in 2019 to 2021, we've only really seen a 2% growth in the implementation of paperless trade across the Africa region. Some interesting stats as well. What this shows you, this is actually 2021 data from the United Nations, and it shows you the current level of paperless trade across the various economies. The dark blue line represents the current percentage achievement rates. The lighter blue line represents the cross-border paperless trade rates of implementation. And you can see the varying results across the world, from the developed economies sitting at around 70%, down to Middle East, North Africa at about, sitting around 51%, And then you look at sub-Saharan Africa, we talked about that earlier, around 47%, 48%, and then the global average of around 56 to 65% in total. So an interesting picture and a very interesting set of diverse results, depending on where in the world you're looking at. If we narrow that down just to Africa itself, in terms of Africa overall, so Africa overall with cross-border and paperless trade combined, we're sitting at around 49.9%. And then you can see the breakdown by central, east, north, southern, and west, with East Africa being the lowest, around 44%, 45%, and North Africa being the most developed at around 64% for overall paperless trade, 55% for paperless trade excluding cross-border. So again, an interesting set of results versus the global picture and the developed economies. So you can clearly see the opportunity that a paperless trade agenda can present in terms of implementing it and fast-tracking that agenda, with the opportunity, with at least 50% potential opportunity still in the pipeline. An opportunity that's fundamental if we're going to achieve the objectives of not only the TFA, but the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement as well. So how do we fast-track paperless trade? What are some of the things that we could propose that are needed to be considered? One is increase the reliance on advanced data transmission, but coupled with the need to mitigate that against poor or inaccurate data and image quality. So there's a big drive globally we're seeing towards use of big data. We're seeing European standards changing. For example, the European RCS2 data requirements, where the European authorities are now pre-screening any shipments that are either coming into the European region or transiting the European region. We're seeing increased data requirements in South Africa, for example. SARS are building the amount of data elements required for their risk engines to start using data or start to increase the use of data for risk analysis. And in other countries around the world, we're seeing this big push towards the use of data and better quality data, more detailed data elements. China have announced that they're going to be increasing the amount of data that's going to be required on a commercial invoice. As an example, I was doing a webinar this week presenting on the new Chinese regulations. The Chinese regulations, for example, for informal clearances are going to require up to 12 additional data elements in their commercial invoices. So if you, for example, had on your Chinese invoice a description such as pullovers, jerseys, you've now got to put in that commercial invoice, how are those jerseys manufactured? Are they weaved? Are they knitted? What gender they're going to be for? What's the composite material, etc. So a lot more data is now being needed by the customs authorities, and particularly focusing on pre-arrival data provision. Additional solutions is the recognition and acceptance of digitization as an integral part of a modernized customs environment. I see there's a slight spelling error there. This, for example, is immediately available in all the DHL countries that we operate in. We have access to those scanners and digitized solutions already available. Integrated system solutions are essential for a smooth clearance process with single window capabilities. We're seeing a much better drive now towards single window processing in a number of countries, and a lot more focus on how countries are gearing up towards single window processing. Being more reliant on electronic document submissions and digital certificates, such as certificates of origin, Euro 1 certificates. In some countries, you still need a stamp and a signature on the certificates, and we now need to move away from that more towards the reliance on electronic documentation. Simplified document protocols, including limiting the basic data elements that are required for a customs entry. Promotion of e-payments for fiscal charges and reducing the need for paper-based payment protocols. In one of the countries that we operate in, we often have trucks that are sitting at a border post waiting for payments, for example, for customs duties to actually reflect in the customs accounts of the customs authorities, despite having paperless evidence from the bank that the transfer has been done. So e-payments are becoming more important, and the reliance on e-documentation to substantiate those payments. Looking at risk profiling using digitized media. So if, for example, if you pick up a shipment through a courier company in London today, that paper is available for the authorities tonight prior to the shipment's arrival on Saturday morning, for example. So they have 24 hours to look through the paperwork, pre-screen it, and determine whether or not they can issue a release prior to arrival. And in South Africa, for example, at the moment, around 72% of shipments coming in are pre-cleared by SARS based on advanced risk screening. The other 28% is a various number of reasons, but not through system failures or inadequacies on the part of the SARS risk engines. But SARS have really latched onto risk profiling and management through the use of automated tools. And as I say, 72% is a very, very good pre-clearance standard. You find the other 28% is the probabilities are that they're customers that have not yet paid their duties and taxes before the entry submitted, or there are permits or documents that are pending from those customers. But it's a pretty good number by regional standards. And then, of course, mutual recognition and increased development of AEO programs, which work hand in hand with the subsequent reduced dependency on paperwork. We're really seeing movements in East and Southern Africa for regional AEO programs and mutual recognition agreements that are becoming more and more important and more recognized as relevant and beneficial to the regional economies and the regional economic communities. And then, of course, the adoption of digital supply networks which allow for the integration of data and information from disparate sources and locations to drive the physical production and distribution of manufactured goods and services. And then I've also just included for your information some of the paperless trade systems that are being promoted in terms of the roadmap that I've just shared with you, including automated customs systems, internet connection available to customs and other trade control agencies, including interdependencies, single window clearances, which are becoming more and more important, especially linkages from customs to other regulatory agencies like Port Health and Department of Agriculture, the electronic submission of customs declarations, electronic permits, electronic sea cargo manifests, e-payments of customs duties and fees, and electronic applications for customs refunds. These are some of the proposed opportunities and solutions that we have to fast track the paperless trade agenda within the Africa region, primarily focused on sub-Saharan Africa, but nonetheless applicable to the Africa continent as a whole, and certainly a pivotal part of the operational implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and helping it to realize its objectives. We've seen slow traction so far with the AFCTFA, and we know that that's primarily due to the finalization of the rules of origin and related tariff offers. But certainly paperless trade will help to facilitate that agenda and help to drive and modernize the economies within the Africa region. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts and points on this topic. It's very important for us to digitize across Africa. I think Juanita will bear testimony to the number of discussions that are ongoing in various countries at a regional and national level on digitization, and how do we progress that digital agenda. Yes, it will involve investment in IT and outdated infrastructure, but certainly the future of customs modernization is very much dependent and hinges on digitization and paperless trade. So thank you very much, Juanita, for the opportunity to share with your participants and to give a bit of our insight into this, what we consider to be a very important topic.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you. I'm coming in for Juanita now. Oh. And you are indeed right that there is a lot of conversation on digitization in East and Southern Africa as we are making our new regional strategy. We have already highlighted digitization as key. And you remember this is one thing that you could read either directly or indirectly just a few weeks ago when you also spoke at the SAF Summit. And so this is a direction that we have to take. Thank you for highlighting the importance of digitization as part of harmonization and simplification of customs processes. You are fully aware of the RKC and its implementation level in Africa, still less than 60%, and also pointing to the reality of customs in Africa, especially on the reliance of hard copy documentation, but giving us very strong proposed solutions, which we hope customs administrations can leverage on. And from the place of the World Customs Organization in the region, these are proposals we shall certainly present. Ladies and gentlemen, about 40 of us have listened to customs, and now we want to listen a little bit on how technology can impact logistics. And we have a lot of people in the logistic chain with us. And I'm going to invite the director of the World Logistics Passport, one of the most brilliant men I have met electronically over the last 2 years, on how technology can impact logistics. Anthony O'Sullivan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Barry, and it's a pleasure to be here with this esteemed audience to talk about an important topic. And at the risk of covering a similar topic that was just mentioned today around the impact of technology on logistics, I will try and provide maybe another angle to this and see and hopefully have this be valuable for the audience. So maybe we can turn to the beginning of this this presentation, which first thinking about the drivers behind technology's impact on logistics. So when talking about the why, we understand the drivers, and these drivers are multiple. They come from different sections. You know, as economists, we always talk about supply and demand. Well, definitely on the demand side, there is a strong rise of the digital customers and the whole e-commerce sector, which has just boomed in the last, even in the last 2 years, actually. During the whole COVID, we have a couple of numbers on that. The extent to which e-commerce has exploded is phenomenal. And that is definitely one of the drivers of technology impact here on the logistics chain. On the supply side, there's also this element of compliance with regulation, and the regulatory compliance. Paradoxically, the more we use digitalization, the more we use modern technologies of blockchain and other, the more we have this transparency, this security, many elements that can ensure that we are complying with different regulations and security. So regulatory compliance, another force. And the cost competitiveness, simply the options and the possibilities for both the actors in logistics, so the ports, the airports, the customs, but also the players themselves. All of them have this incentive to move to go digital because you're faster, you're cheaper, you're more productive on all fronts. So there's a series of supply and demand side forces which are pushing for this to happen. And I mentioned the point on the rise of the growth of e-commerce. If you just see 27%, I mean, keep that in mind, growth of e-commerce logistics market in 2020, 27%. I mean, that is absolutely phenomenal. And we're not, we know we have a sense, an instinctive sense that e-commerce has grown over this period, but maybe not to that extent. And the average growth projections over the next 5 years are in the range of 8 to 10%. And as mentioned earlier, this is just one of the forces which is pushing for greater influence of technology on the logistics and supply chain. Now, at the same time, we're faced with a particular challenge here, which is the current situation, the current context. And there were a few numbers which were cited already in the previous excellent presentation from DHL. I might add just another angle here on numbers is today, when you go through the whole value chain in logistics and transport, from export to import, and you consider all the different actors, consider that you have on average about 25 different stakeholders, 25. So between the banks, the shippers, the insurance, the freight forwarder, the customs, the terminals, the warehouses, you have 25 different actors on average. So that's a huge element of complexity right there. In addition to that, you have 30 to 40 documents and papers which are exchanged at different steps here between permits and and reconciliation statements and bills of lading and all of these different things. So we're talking going paperless. It's a challenge. It's a challenge from the number of stakeholders, a challenge from simply just the number of existing documents that are out there. And, with that comes culture. And we all know, for one of the famous Peter Drucker quotes, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? If we have a culture of paper, we're not going to change that overnight. So there's lots of things which need to be adjusted. We can have a strategy towards going digital, but it's going to take time, and it takes convincing and communication and investment from all angles and all actors and all stakeholders to make it happen. 90% of data extraction, data entry today is manual, and 12% of invoices are processed manually and require additional work. So that's just a series of data points which are pointing to the challenge before us. Now, when you actually talk to companies and you want, what is the vision going forward, in the area of transportation and logistics, you're going towards, 90% of respondents in surveys conducted would basically say it's moving towards, and it's absolutely crucial to go paperless and to go, full technology on transportation and logistics. So the desire, the strategy, and even to a certain degree, the investment is there, but we're starting from a faraway base, and we just need to be all aware of the challenge, before us, with some of the numbers that were cited earlier, the 25 stakeholders, the 40 different documents and papers on average to make this happen. So it's going to need a real concerted effort. Now, when we think about digital tools that can help automate this logistics chain, one way to be thinking about it is by decomposing the value chain itself and thinking, on the one hand, you have the customer experience itself. They want seamless end-to-end documentation, easy shipment tracking, multimodality, automatic invoicing. So that's one dimension. You have the business process dimension, which is, better forecasting, automated shipment of booking processes, etc. And then you have the sales management dimension, which is the quotes of pricing, the tracking of sales, the tracking of auditing, etc. All of these different dimensions are interacting with each other, and it's helpful to break down that value chain. Now, what are some of the key challenges of going digital? Again, there are surveys in this domain. I mentioned some earlier, but if you survey companies, there's top 3 challenges that come out. Of course, budget. You wouldn't be surprised with that one, but budget comes as number 1 in the survey. Company culture comes number 2, and lack of tech skills comes as number 3. And I would argue here in this session today that the second one is actually probably the most important, as I mentioned earlier. Budget constraints are often estimated as a barrier, because there are actually quite a few technology advanced solutions, namely as soft infrastructure, which can be quite cost conscious for the implementers. The gaps in tech skills can be overcome also with various mechanisms and different suppliers. It's the culture that has to be shifted here, and this comes through education, it comes through training, it comes through repetition, and it comes through concerted work and effort from all the players at hand, and public-private partnership here, which is absolutely fundamental. Collaboration between government and business to make this happen. CEO vision, another one. All the major CEOs of all these entities making it super clear that, as several people said on this chat, paperless is the way to go, and technology must be accelerated in logistics and the logistics supply chain. So within this, we have a framework for various digital tools. And here we have my colleague Nadim, which will do a quick overview of that before we turn to the World Logistics Passport, which is one of the solutions and ways to accelerate technology in trade and logistics. Please, Nadim.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And thank you, everyone. This is a fantastic webinar, and we are very excited to be here. So following on from my colleague, excuse me, my internet is perfect. Okay, so following on from what Anthony was mentioning regarding some of the key trends, as well as some of the challenges facing digitalization logistics and why it's so important. As part of the World Logistics Passport, we have been in contact with freight forwarder associations across the world to develop a training package for some of the members that they represent on how specifically can they address this key trend that's emerging on the importance of the digitalization of logistics. And we've identified 4 key steps in some of the conversations we've had with freight forwarders across the world. The first key step is how to develop your logistics value chain. So looking at the value chain itself, seeing which parts of the value chain, decomposing it, and seeing which parts can benefit from digitalization and which parts just cannot at the moment, and really being able to segment that. Then after doing that is really identifying the key challenges in enabling digitalization in each part of the value chain. So you have the mapping exercise, but then the second part really comes around to doing that data analysis, interviewing stakeholders, understanding really what are some of the gaps that need to be tackled, and therefore the solutions. And that comes to our third step, which is identifying and prioritizing key areas for digitalization. And then as a result, the fourth step is developing a digital plan. So developing a cohesive plan and strategy as a company to be able to create this organizational transformation, to be able to digitalize, and to be able to capitalize on this trend. So a few quick slides on what I mean by decomposing the value chain. So as you can see from the transaction all the way to sale, there are multiple steps involved, complicated steps involved in the value chain. But out of these 10 steps, you can see that 7 out of 10 have high potential to be digitalized, from the transaction to the pre-import document preparation, to arrival of the good, to duty payment, clearance, to sale. There are so many ways where the digitalization or using digital tools for a company can help essentially reduce costs and increase efficiency on their journey, which is some of the work that the World Logistics Passport is doing, which Anthony will get to in a moment. So really mapping that and seeing where you can benefit from digitalization is the first step. And the second one is identifying those key challenges. And in the identification of key challenges, we have interviews with key stakeholders. You want to leverage existing data and analytics, and you also want to conduct benchmark analysis. So through these 3 methods, you would be able to understand, okay, so for that first step in the transaction, by interviewing with some of the key stakeholders that I'm conducting business with, and by conducting some benchmark analysis, seeing what other companies are doing in my region that are highly digitalized, how can I really tackle transaction from that digitalization perspective? How can I benefit from that? And then once that is done, as you can see in the steps from the value chain, you can realize where you can benefit from digitalization, and then think of some of the products that you could be using, some of the online tools that you could be using as a company, as a trader or freight forwarder, to benefit from digitalization. So some of the product examples that we have a close partnership with DP World as part of the World Logistics Passport. So we know quite in detail and in depth some of the innovative digital tools that they have rolled out, such as Cargo's Flow, which enables end-to-end supply chain tracking of shipments and cargoes from across the world. This helps, again, to reduce cost, increase efficiency on that part of the value chain, and helps move the company into the era of digitalization of logistics. And once that mapping exercise is done, once you've done those data analyses, those interviews, and you've done that benchmarking exercise, then we come to developing a digital plan. And this is where we have 3 key areas to build digital potential. The first one is essentially the basics, this mapping exercise, and then just seeing from creating a website as a company itself, and then just seeing what sort of digital tools that I could use to enable these benefits of digitalization. Then the second one would be building internal capabilities, having training, internal training for staff on digitalization and the importance of digitalization. And this is quite fundamental. By building internal capabilities, the company can go from just using outsourced online tools to understanding internally how they can digitalize themselves, how they can make their entire value chain an easy end-to-end user experience. And that leads into the focus on innovation. Once you have the basics, once you build internal capabilities, then the company can really focus on innovation and realizing the advantages of digitalization. So that's just a quick overview on the framework of digital tools that we present to some of the freight forwarders from around the world as part of the work that we do. And I will now go back, give the floor back to Anthony to talk a bit about the World Logistics Passport itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadeem. So to conclude on the last part of this presentation, so the framework that was presented by Nadeem, this whole assessment of the value chain, this is not theory, it's not just a process, it's reality. And it's a reality that's being implemented today with the support of the World Logistics Passport initiative. How this is done, the objective basically of the World Logistics Passport is to support greater efficiency within the logistics and supply chain, using all mechanisms possible and working closely with partners across the world. So it starts with customs authorities, which are absolutely fundamental and also represented by the WCO with their authorized economic operator programs. But it also includes the port operators, the airport operators, and the airlines. This is the kind of the building block to start with. And we are working closely with them in a series of key markets, ranging from China, India, Brazil in Latin America, South Africa, and a number of other African countries, working closely with them to implement a more efficient logistics chain from the perspective of the trader and freight forwarder. And technology is one of the first, if you want, dimensions that we are looking to incorporate at every step of that chain. That's the step, is working first with the partners, and then at a second step, working with the traders and freight forwarders themselves. So it's kind of two angles. And so, so to further support and get the full benefits from this streamlined supply and logistics chain, we are adding a loyalty program, which for the air journey, for the sea journey, for the multimodal journey. And so this can include things like priority for cargo reception when the goods arrive at the port. It can include advanced cargo information, which is sent to customs to accelerate customs clearance. It can include a speedy transfer of cargo from the port all the way to the airport, etc. There's a series of different benefits which are incorporated in this passport, which is then provided to members who are part of this WLP and who benefit from all these advantages when they demonstrate further growth in trade. All of this supported by greater investment in technology with the different partners themselves. And behind this investment in technology, a fund has been set up, which is the Dubai Logistics World Fund, which is 50% financed by the UAE, 50% by IFIs, International Financial Institutions. And this fund is there also to help complement some gaps, like the low-hanging fruit in which there are the greatest opportunities for technology impact on the chain, basically are supported by this fund, which is being launched in 2022 and supporting the loyalty program around the World Logistics Passport. So to summarize things on the sort of part of the solution, this WLP, this passport is giving an opportunity for companies to take advantage of a series of benefits and improved infrastructure, especially soft infrastructure, more technology-oriented infrastructure in all the participating hubs across the world. And we're looking forward to continuing to work very closely with the WCO and incorporating the AEO program to accelerate the adoption of the AEO program through the WLP as well. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you to you and Nadine. I think you captured us, and yes, we went over the time, but I think it was very interesting that you showed that to us and you invite the colleagues on the line, because although we're not a lot of colleagues, I think I know they're very powerful and they link with different organizations. So we really appreciate you sharing that today. So okay. Then I've got Dr. Juanita Clark. Yeah, it's Dr. Juanita Clark on the line. That's going to tell us a little bit on what's happening in Africa. So Juanita, we're not going to cut you short, but maybe if you can stay within the time frame, it will be very much appreciated. As I said, it's recorded and it will be on YouTube, and a lot of our colleagues will listen to that after the event. Thank you, Juanita. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, colleagues, for having me this afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you, and I'm really excited to talk to you just a little bit about where South Africa fits into the rest of the world, and how we're looking from a digitalization point of view. I think that even this time last year, we still we're sort of thinking we're going to get out of the grip of the pandemic, and one of the things that the pandemic has done, it hasn't done a lot of good things, but one of the things that it has done is it has truly shown us the value of the digital economy. For many years, I've been with this association for almost going on 12 years now. And, we've always spoken about ourselves as sort of the quiet engine of the economy. People just expect their phones to work. They really just expect, when they click a button on a laptop to work. And for not too long, have people actually realized the immense power and opportunity that sits within the digital economy and within digitalization. And as I listen to my colleagues that have gone before me and that have spoken about digitalization, I always say to people like, we've got to now understand that we are in this fourth industrial revolution. For so long, we've spoken about the fourth industrial revolution and have made reference to it. And people have tried to, put a definition to it and say what it is. Well, I think everybody will know that right now that we are firmly in the fourth industrial revolution. And I think what we've got to understand about the path that we're about to take is that it is not it's not whether you want to or not. It is happening. And if you're not part of it, then you're going to get left behind. And we've seen that in the history of the world. We know today, everybody watches Netflix. So it's such a great example for me always of a company that have used technology to disrupt. Some of you may not know that Netflix actually originally when they started out went after the video rental market. And what they tried to do at that stage is that they approached Blockbuster and they wanted a very tiny investment, like, a very small investment. And they tried to sell this digital world to Blockbuster. And Blockbuster actually laughed at them. They said, nobody's going to do this. Who's going to download this? Well, the rest is history. We know that today, Blockbuster, I think it was announced about a month ago, finally closed down their last store in the US. In South Africa, we haven't seen any DVD rental stores or let alone VHS stores. And most of us don't even own a DVD player anymore. That's the point I'm trying to make, is if we don't get and become part of this digital transformation, if we internally in our companies don't actively sit down and talk about a digital transformation, the chances are that we're going to be left behind. We've also seen that with the work from home movement during the initial stages of the pandemic, that the companies that were best set to continue to be productive were those companies that had, and I think my culture, my previous colleague referred to that had a culture of digitalization. And for us, it's really important to get our minds right, to understand that the digital economy is here to stay, and we have to embark on digitalization strategies and look at ways that we can digitally transform our companies. Because if we don't do that, those that have digitally transformed are set to have the lion's share of the digital and how we're going to work going forward. So we have to start creating mindsets. We have to invest in reskilling our people. We have to remove the fear of the digital way of work from people. We have to train people how to use new technologies and new products that are available and new software packages. And most of us resist that. We don't want to do that. You know, we like doing things the old way. We're scared of failure. We're scared of not knowing how to use it. But we have to embark on digitalization strategies, because the world is going in this direction. And if we're not going to do it, like I've said before, we're going to be left behind. I'm going to share just a couple of slides with you just to show a little bit on how and what's happening around digitalization. Sorry, I'm just trying to find that presentation. Let me just reshare. And there's an immense amount of strategies that are being announced by companies all over the world. You know, in looking at this and in trying to understand, you know, where the world is going, one of the things that we have to sort of look at as well is, like, you know, there's always this talk about digitalization, but one of the areas that, you know, we can use an example that we can consider is to look at something like Airbnb. I mean, Airbnb is this company. It's a place where you can book accommodation, yet it doesn't even own a single property. Uber, I mean, all of us have got the Uber app. So the amount of digitalization and how fast the world is moving and where it's getting to is really immense. And the way that technology evolves is that it's exponential. So we're doubling on all our, you know, information annually. But I wanted to take a moment today just to show a little bit of the opportunity within this in this sector, and I'm going to particularly just focus on two slides. But just quickly, the Digital Council, we're just an industry association that works with government and stakeholders. We look at ways of deploying telecommunications infrastructure and how we can connect all our citizens to the digital economy. But you're welcome to go and read up on us a little bit more, find us on any one of the digital platforms out there. But I wanted to take a moment today to just talk to you about what the rest of the world looks like versus where we are as South Africa, and actually it's not just South Africa, it's actually sub-Saharan Africa. If we look at March 2021 this year, we can see that the mobile connectivity, we've had approximately 68% unique subscriber penetration at a global level. If we look at the unique mobile internet subscriber penetration globally, then there's approximately 55% penetration. And then if we look at mobile connections in the rest of the world, 5G is growing, and in spite of all the fake news that surrounds 5G, which makes my life and my job incredibly difficult, because people still think that the coronavirus was given to them through 5G. But you know, there seems to be an immense amount of growth within the 5G economy. To put it into context around the capability of 5G versus what we now all use, which is probably 4G and in some cases 3G, is that 5G will connect approximately 1 million devices per square kilometer. So it is absolutely astounding what future technologies are going to give us and how we will be able to use that that technology. Now, 5G technology is not just going to be traditional communication, the way that we look at it now and the way that we perceive your cell phone. So we're talking about all very special things like, what we call the Internet of Things. It will be, it'll enable connected vehicles. It'll enable a connected home, your fridge, your front door, your security. So every single connection, if we talk about 1 million devices per square kilometer, a lot of people say, how do you put 1 million people into a square kilometer? It's not a human solution anymore. So 5G is really going to enable this next generation of connectivity when we really start looking at artificial intelligence, at smart cities, at reading our water meters, the ability to open your curtains, connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles eventually, etc. But we're sitting at about 8% 5G connectivity globally. 4G remains the leading connectivity from an international point of view. And what's really interesting for me is if you look at 3G connectivity, it's 21% of people internationally is still using 3G connectivity, with 14% of globally people that still uses 2G technology. Data centers, please remember this number. It's about 4,854 data centers in 129 countries located globally. And then tower infrastructure, another staggering number. Outside of sub-Saharan Africa, there's approximately 4.94 mobile towers that connect communities and people outside of Africa. So IoT devices, all your connections, smart meter readings, all of the other sensors that we are now deploying, that are tracking parcels, that are doing all of the clever things that are making our lives so much easier. There's approximately 12 billion IoT connections globally, and 72% smartphone penetration. When you look at over-the-top applications, globally there were 218 billion applications that were downloaded in 2020. And in 2021, there's approximately 5 billion internet users. Active social media users, you can look at that number, approximately a 53.6% penetration rate. And these people spend almost 7 hours a day on the internet. So those are some staggering numbers. And then from a fixed connectivity, 12 years ago, when I started this industry association, very few people knew what fiber was about. It was generally accepted that it was something that made up part of your diet, that you had to consume daily, and that it would keep you healthy. But few of us understood that what fiber to the home was. It's been an immense journey trying to raise awareness for the value of fiber optic infrastructure, which is really building the foundation of future connectivity. So from a fixed broadband point of view, globally there's almost 59% penetration. The fiber to the home penetration internationally is sitting at approximately 35%. They've got 10% DSL, 8% cable, which is not very prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa. Other connectivity methods approximately less than 1%, and fixed wireless access approximately 5%. Now, I just want to compare some of these numbers with what we see in Africa, and I'm going to remind you as I tell you about this, about some of the numbers that I've spoken to. So remember that the number for mobile connectivity globally is almost sitting at 70%. In South Africa, that's sitting at 49%. So unique subscriber penetration. Globally, our number for unique mobile internet subscriber penetration is sitting at 55%, and in Sub-Saharan Africa, unfortunately, only at 30%. Globally, we've got 4,000, I'm moving over to the data center side. Globally, we've got 4,854 data centers in 129 countries. In sub-Saharan Africa, we've got a mere 79 data centers in 14 countries. Tower infrastructure, 4.94 million towers outside of Africa, and here 169,000 towers. IoT devices, 12 billion versus 24 million IoT connections. And then our terrestrial and international connectivity, we know that that is massively expanded. We've seen a lot of new cables that have landed on the African coast, and especially in South Africa. There's always new cables that are being announced. And then, of course, on Africa, one of the other things we've seen tremendous growth is in the fiber optic networks that have been deployed to connect businesses and homes. From an OTT device, in Africa, we connected 25, globally 218 billion apps, and in Africa, 25 billion apps. In Africa, we've only got 470 million users versus 4.5 billion users of the internet. Our social network penetration rate also much lower than what we are seeing globally, how the rest of the world is moving. And then, of course, our fixed line connectivity. Globally, we've got 35% penetration rate on fiber to the home and fiber to the business. I mean, in South Africa and in Africa, a mere 1.1%. Our fixed broadband is sitting at 2.2% versus almost 60% globally. And we've got a very small DSL market. Other connectivity is sitting at 0.1% versus 0.6% globally. So still a tremendous amount of work that we need to do. However, if we start looking at the rate of digital adoption globally and the pace at which globally the world is moving, we can expect that this wave will hit us in Africa, although it will be a little bit slower than what we've seen globally. I must say that what's been very notable in the last year is the amount of data center market growth. Most of you would have noticed that Africa Data Centers announced an expansion and they're going to invest $300 million. Vantage Data Centers, I think last week or the week before, announced another 1 billion rand data center build that they will be taking and embarking on. Oracle have announced, they've already announced 2 years ago, but they announced in the last couple of days, again, that the original plans that they made 2 years ago is now going to find fruition. Terraco has recently upgraded their data center in most of their locations. And of course, NTT have made similar announcements. So, and if we look at the co-location data centers, that's, well, the data centers in general, that's a very clear sort of indicator of where we expect the adoption of technology to be going. I can tell you that in the last year, since the onset of the pandemic, as people have moved out of corporate offices to work from home, there's been a 60% increase in demand for broadband services. At national government level, they have just announced the establishment of a broadband access fund, which is looking at connecting people in lower income areas and making sure that we connect people. It's a small pilot of only 50,000 people that will be connected, but that is in line with how government typically do things. They won't spend too much money. Initially, they will trial it and see if it works, and if there's success, they will do it. We know that government has been speaking about connecting the next 12 million users to the internet in South Africa alone. We're seeing a lot of similar initiatives of African governments announcing very strong broadband strategies to connect people in outlying areas. Yeah, I think for now, that is it. I'm just struggling to see the time and I'm not sure where I started. But Juanita, if that is good with you, then I think you know, in just concluding my, you know, what I'm trying to share with our audience today is that there's going to be immense adoption, and we can expect immense digital transformation to be taking place over the next 5 years. It's incredibly important for companies at all sectors to understand that the digital economy is here. It's going to touch on every aspect of sectors across, irrespective of where you're working in. And companies will have to, you know, look at their own digital strategies, their digital transformation strategies, and adopt strategies that will help them digitalize and potentially even adopt permanent work from home strategies. We're still not sure about the impact of the pandemic. Everybody's talking about a fourth wave. What we need to be sure that we are doing is that we are enabling our employees to remain productive, irrespective of whether they're in the office. It needs to be seamless, irrespective of where they work. And that is only really possible when you make use of digital platforms. We've seen in the last couple of months an immense amount of productivity tracking tools that have been announced, a lot of investment globally into companies that are establishing creative technologies to enable a permanent work from home strategy. But that's it from my side. I'm going to hand back to you at this stage.
Thank you so much, Juanita.
You're welcome, Larry.
Definitely up. Thank you to Martin and Jason, to Anthony, and the other Dr. Juanita, and our Juanita. We wish you well. We definitely will do this again. This is a very strong and interesting topic, and what a powerful panelist.